The morning routine. The alarm clock's shrill beeping pierced through the darkness of the small studio apartment at 4:30 a.m. Rosa Martinez reached out from under her thin blanket, her calloused fingers fumbling for the snooze button. She missed it twice before finally silencing the persistent noise. She lay still for a moment, staring at the water-stained ceiling of her Boston apartment, gathering the energy to face another day. At 42 years old, Rosa had been cleaning houses for nearly 2 decades, ever since she'd arrived in America from Guatemala with nothing but a battered suitcase and dreams that had long since been packed away like winter clothes. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, tucked away in a rundown building in Dorchester. The radiator clanked and hissed, providing inconsistent heat that left some corners freezing while others were stifling. The linoleum floor was cracked, and the single window overlooked a narrow alley where trash bins sat eternally full. But it was hers, paid for with her own hard-earned money, and that meant something. Rosa swung her legs out of bed, her knees protesting as they did every morning. The cold floor sent a shock through her system, finishing what the alarm had started. She shuffled to the bathroom, avoiding her reflection in the spotted mirror. She didn't need to see the dark circles under her eyes or the gray that increasingly streaked her black hair to know they were there. After a quick shower in the temperamental stall that alternated between scalding and freezing, Rosa dressed in her usual work uniform, comfortable black pants, a simple white polo shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days but still had a few months left in them. She couldn't afford to be wasteful. In the kitchenette, she made instant coffee and ate a piece of toast with margarine. Breakfast was always quick, always the same. There was no time for variety when her first client expected her at 6:30 a.m. sharp. As she sipped her coffee, Rosa glanced at the photograph stuck to her refrigerator with a magnet advertising a pizza place that had closed 3 years ago. The picture showed a much younger version of herself, standing beside a handsome man with kind eyes. Miguel, her husband. He died 7 years ago, his heart giving out during a double shift at the warehouse where he'd worked. They'd never had children, and sometimes Rosa wondered if that was a blessing or a curse. A blessing because no child should grow up in poverty like she had. A curse because now, at 42, she was utterly alone. She rinsed her cup in the sink, grabbed her worn canvas bag containing her cleaning supplies, and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. The Worthington estate. The commute to Beacon Hill took nearly an hour and a half, involving 2 bus transfers and a 15-minute walk. Rosa had learned to sleep sitting up on buses, a skill born of necessity. By the time she reached the tree-lined streets of one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods, the sun was just beginning to hint at rising. The Worthington estate stood behind wrought iron gates, a 3-story brick mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from an English countryside. Rosa had been cleaning the house every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the past 5 years, and she still felt a small flutter of intimidation every time she approached the service entrance. She punched in the code. The Worthingtons were currently on a 3-month European vacation, and let herself in through the back door. The house was silent, and Rosa preferred it that way. When the family was home, she had to navigate around their schedules, their moods, their casual dismissals of her presence as if she were a particularly useful piece of furniture. Mrs. Eleanor Worthington, matriarch of the family and heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, treated Rosa with the kind of distant politeness one might show a competent appliance. Mr. Richard Worthington barely acknowledged her existence at all. Their 2 adult children, Cameron and Victoria, were no better. Cameron, a hedge fund manager, would leave coffee rings on every surface and expensive watches scattered carelessly on bathroom counters. Victoria, who worked in fashion, though Rosa had never quite understood doing what, would leave piles of designer clothes on the floor of her bedroom, tags still attached to items she'd never wear. But when they were gone, like now, the house was Rosa's domain. She moved through the familiar routine with practiced efficiency. First, the kitchen, wiping down the marble countertops, cleaning the commercial-grade appliances that were barely used since the family ate out most nights. Then the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier that required careful dusting. The living room with its Persian rugs and the grand piano no one played. Up the sweeping staircase to the bedrooms, 4 of them, each with its own en-suite bathroom done in Italian marble. Rosa worked steadily, methodically. She'd learned long ago not to wonder what it would be like to live in such luxury. That path led only to bitterness, and bitterness was a weight she couldn't afford to carry. Instead, she took quiet pride in her work. When she left, every surface would gleam, every pillow would be perfectly positioned. Every towel would be folded just so. She was vacuuming the second floor hallway when she noticed something odd. The door to Mr. Worthington's study, usually locked tight, was slightly ajar. Rosa frowned. In 5 years, she'd never been allowed in that room. Mrs. Worthington had been very clear about that on her first day. The study is off limits. My husband's private business affairs, you understand. Rosa stood in the hallway, vacuum cleaner humming at her feet, debating with herself. She should just close the door and move on. It wasn't her business. But what if something was wrong? What if the door had been forced? The Worthingtons were away, after all. Perhaps she should check, just to be sure everything was secure. Making her decision, Rosa turned off the vacuum and approached the study. She pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The room was exactly what she'd imagined. Walls lined with built-in bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive mahogany desk, leather chairs, and the smell of expensive cigars. A laptop sat closed on the desk, and papers were scattered across its surface in what might have been disarray or might have been some organizational system only Mr. Worthington understood. Rosa was about to turn and leave when something caught her eye. Partially hidden under a stack of manila folders was an envelope, yellowed with age. What drew her attention was the name written on it in faded ink, Maria Elena Martinez. Rosa's heart stuttered. That had been her mother's name. The letter. With trembling hands, Rosa pulled the envelope from beneath the folders. It was postmarked from Guatemala City, dated 35 years ago, just a few years before her mother had died. The envelope was addressed to Maria Elena Martinez, care of Worthington Industries, Boston, Massachusetts. Rosa sank into one of the leather chairs, her mind reeling. Why would her mother have been sending letters to Worthington Industries? Her mother had been a seamstress in a small village in Guatemala, barely literate, struggling to feed her 5 children after Rosa's father had abandoned them. She died when Rosa was 12, and Rosa had never known much about her mother's life before the hardship and poverty that had defined her final years. The envelope had been opened, the flap torn roughly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting shaky and unpracticed. Rosa's Spanish was still fluent despite her years in America, and she began to read. My dearest Rosa, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I pray that this letter has found its way to you. I am writing this with the help of Father Domingo. As you know, my writing is poor, but there are things you must know. Your father, he was not the man who left us when you were small. That man, Carlos, he was cruel, and I was glad to see him go. Your true father was an American, a man named Robert Ashford Worthington. He came to our village with a church group, building schools and houses. We fell in love, though we both knew it was impossible. He was from a different world, engaged to be married to a woman of his own class. When I told him I was pregnant with you, he wanted to marry me to take me to America. But his family, they threatened to disown him, to destroy his life. He was weak, my Rosa, but he was not entirely without conscience. He set up something called a trust fund, money for your future, for your education. He made me promise to tell you about it when you were old enough to understand. But I've been too ashamed, too afraid. His family, the Worthingtons, they are powerful people. They paid me to stay silent, to never speak his name. Every year, money came for you, but I was too proud, too foolish. I hid it away, afraid that if I used it, they would come and take you from me. I wanted to tell you so many times, especially as I grew sicker. But fear held my tongue. In the Bank of Guatemala City, there is an account in your name. The number is written on the back of this letter. The attorney's name is there too. He can help you claim what is yours. I am sorry, my daughter, for all the struggles you will face. I am sorry I was not stronger. But please know that you were conceived in love, even if that love could not withstand the weight of the world. Your mother, Maria Elena. Rosa read the letter 3 times, each time hoping the words would change, that she had misunderstood. But the message remained the same. Robert Ashford Worthington, Richard Worthington's father, who had died 10 years ago, was her biological father. The people whose toilets she cleaned, whose floors she mopped, were her family. She turned the letter over with numb fingers. There, in different handwriting, were 2 lines, an account number and a name. Gerald Pemberton, attorney at law, Boston, Massachusetts. Rosa sat in that leather chair for a long time, the letter clutched in her hands. Emotions warred within her, anger, confusion, disbelief, and underneath it all, a tiny flame of hope that she tried desperately to extinguish. Hope was dangerous. Hope could destroy her. Finally, she stood up, carefully folded the letter, and placed it in her pocket. She looked around the study, suddenly seeing it with different eyes. This room, this house, this life of privilege and ease, it could have been hers. Should have been hers. But it wasn't. And a letter from her dead mother wasn't going to change that. Rosa finished her cleaning in a daze, going through the motions automatically while her mind churned. By the time she left the Worthington estate, it was early afternoon, and instead of heading to her second job, cleaning office buildings downtown, she found herself on a bus heading toward the financial district. The attorney, Gerald Pemberton's office, was located on the 23rd floor of a gleaming skyscraper. Rosa stood in the lobby, suddenly acutely aware of her clean uniform, her worn sneakers, her canvas bag. The security guard looked at her with suspicion until she mentioned Mr. Pemberton's name. Even then, he made her wait while he called up to verify. "Mr. Pemberton doesn't have you in his appointment book," the guard said, his hand hovering over the phone, ready to call for backup if this cleaning lady became difficult. "Please," Rosa said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell him it's about Maria Elena Martinez. Tell him I have a letter." The guard's expression suggested he thought this was all nonsense, but he relayed the message. His eyebrows rose in surprise at whatever response he received. "He says to send you up. 23rd floor, suite 2340. The elevator ride seemed to last an eternity. Rosa watched the numbers climb, her reflection in the polished doors showing a woman who looked older than her 42 years, tired, out of place. What was she doing here? This was probably a mistake, some elaborate hoax or misunderstanding. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that screamed old money. Dark wood paneling, original artwork on the walls, fresh flowers on the receptionist's desk. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect hair and a designer suit, looked up with barely concealed surprise at Rosa's appearance. "I'm here to see Mr. Pemberton," Rosa said quietly. "He's expecting me." "Of course." "Please, have a seat. He'll be with you in just a moment." Rosa perched on the edge of a leather sofa, her hands folded in her lap, trying to ignore the receptionist's periodic glances. She didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, a door opened and a man emerged. Gerald Pemberton was in his 70s, tall and thin with silver hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at Rosa with an expression she couldn't quite read, surprised, certainly, but also something that might have been sadness. "Ms. Martinez," he said. "Please come into my office." His office was even more impressive than the reception area, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Boston. But Rosa barely noticed the view. Her attention was fixed on Mr. Pemberton, who gestured for her to sit in a chair across from his massive desk. "I wasn't sure I'd ever meet you," he said, settling into his own chair. "Your mother. She was a stubborn woman. She refused to tell you about any of this." "You knew my mother?" Rosa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not personally, no. But I've handled the Worthington family's legal affairs for 40 years. I was the one who arranged the trust fund your father set up. Every year, we sent money to your mother, and every year, she refused to touch it. She insisted it be held for you, but she also refused to tell you about it. Robert Worthington tried several times to meet you, to be part of your life, but your mother wouldn't allow it. She said it would only bring pain." Rosa's hands clenched in her lap. "And you all just, what? Watched me struggle. Watched my mother work herself to death. You knew there was money that could have helped us, and you did nothing?" Mr. Pemberton had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Your mother made her choices, Ms. Martinez. Legally, we couldn't force her to use the money. And the Worthingtons, well, they were content to let sleeping dogs lie. Robert's wife, Constance, never knew about you. Neither did his children. The annual payments were buried in complex accounting. When Robert died 10 years ago, he left instructions that if you were ever to come forward, I was to help you claim what was yours. And if I never came forward, then the money would have eventually reverted to the Worthington estate after your death." Rosa felt a wave of anger so intense it made her dizzy. All those years of struggle, of working 3 jobs, of watching her mother waste away from exhaustion and illness. All those years when there had been money, help, a family that could have made everything easier. And everyone had just looked the away. "How much?" she asked. "How much money are we talking about?" Mr. Pemberton opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several documents. The trust fund, with 35 years of compound interest, currently holds approximately $12 million. The room seemed to tilt. Rosa gripped the arms of her chair, certain she had misheard. 12 million? In addition, Mr. Pemberton continued, his voice gentle, as if he understood she was in shock. Robert Worthington's will included a provision. If you ever came forward and could prove your identity, which the letter from your mother and a DNA test would certainly do, you were to receive a share of his estate equal to what his other children received. That would be approximately $40 million. Rosa couldn't breathe. The numbers were too large, too incomprehensible. $52 million. It was more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, more money than she had ever imagined existing in one place. There's more, Mr. Pemberton said. Robert also owned a 10% stake in Worthington Industries, held in a separate entity. That stake is now worth approximately $120 million. His will specify that it should be divided equally among all his children, including any that might come forward after his death. So, what does that mean? Rosa asked, her voice faint. It means, Ms. Martinez, that you're looking at an inheritance of approximately $90 million, plus the $12 million in the trust fund. $102 million, give or take. The decision. Rosa didn't remember leaving Mr. Pemberton's office. She found herself walking through Boston Common, the letter still in her pocket, her mind reeling from impossible numbers and revelations that had upended everything she thought she knew about her life. $102 million. She sat on a bench, watching tourists take photos of the Swan boats, watching young professionals hurry past with their coffee and their briefcases, watching the world continue as if it hadn't just turned inside out. What did one do with $102 million? Rosa had spent her entire adult life worrying about whether she could afford a pair of shoes, whether the rent increase would force her to find a cheaper apartment, whether she'd be able to work until retirement, or if her body would give out first. And all along, there had been money. Not just money, a fortune. A family. A father who, according to Mr. Pemberton, had wanted to know her, to be part of her life. Rosa thought about her mother, about the choices she'd made. Maria Elena had been so proud, so determined to make her own way. She'd refused the Worthington money out of pride, out of fear, out of a desire to protect her daughter from a world that would see her as less than, as other, as the product of a shameful secret. But in protecting her, had Maria Elena condemned them both to unnecessary suffering? Rosa's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from her employer at the office cleaning company. Where are you? You were supposed to start your shift an hour ago. For the first time in 20 years, Rosa didn't care. Let them fire her. What did it matter now? Except, it did matter. Because she wasn't rich yet. She had a letter and the word of an attorney. But she didn't have access to any money. And even if she did, could she really claim it? Could she walk into the Worthington family's life and tear apart everything they knew? Richard. Worthington believed his father had been faithful to his mother. Cameron and Victoria believed that they were the only heirs. The revelation of Rosa's existence would shatter their understanding of their family, their inheritance, their father's character. Did she have the right to do that? Rosa thought about the Worthingtons as she knew them. Mrs. Eleanor Worthington with her charity galas and her perfect hair, treating Rosa like a particularly useful appliance. Richard Worthington barely acknowledging her existence. Cameron leaving messes for her to clean up without a thought. Victoria with her casual cruelty, complaining loudly on the phone about how impossible it was to find good help these days while Rosa scrubbed her bathroom floor. They had never been unkind, exactly. They'd paid her fairly, on time. They'd even given her a $50 Christmas bonus every year. But they had never seen her as fully human, as someone with dreams and struggles and a life as complex as their own. And now she was supposed to feel guilty about claiming what was legally hers. Rosa stood up from the bench, her decision made. She would claim her inheritance. She would take what her father had wanted her to have. Not out of revenge, though she'd be lying if she said that didn't factor into it, but because she had earned it. She had earned it through every floor she'd scrubbed, every toilet she'd cleaned, every time she'd swallowed her pride and accepted the casual dismissals of people who had so much while she had so little. She called Mr. Pemberton from the park. I want to move forward, she said when he answered. Whatever needs to happen, whatever tests or paperwork or legal proceedings, I want to claim my inheritance. There was a pause, and then Mr. Pemberton said, I'll start the process immediately. But Ms. Martinez, you should know. This will not be easy. The Worthingtons will fight this. They'll claim fraud. They'll challenge the DNA results. They'll drag this through court for years if they can. Are you prepared for that? Rosa thought about her studio apartment, about the water stains on the ceiling and the inconsistent heat. She thought about her aching knees and her worn-out shoes and the years stretching ahead of her, cleaning other people's messes until her body finally gave out. I'm prepared, she said. The revelation. The DNA test was simple, a cheek swab in Mr. Pemberton's office, processed at a lab that specialized in legal paternity cases. The results took 2 weeks and confirmed what the letter had claimed. Robert Ashford Worthington was Rosa's biological father with a 99.9% certainty. Mr. Pemberton filed the necessary legal documents to have Rosa recognized as an heir to Robert Worthington's estate. He also filed a petition to have the estate reopened, as significant assets had been distributed without knowledge of all legitimate heirs. The legal notice required that all interested parties be informed, which meant that the Worthington family was about to discover that their father's maid was also their father's daughter. Rosa wasn't present when they received the news, but Mr. Pemberton described it to her later. Mrs. Eleanor Worthington had fainted and had to be revived with smelling salts. Richard Worthington had turned purple with rage and threatened to have his lawyers destroy both Rosa and Mr. Pemberton. Cameron had immediately started calculating how much money he stood to lose. Victoria had thrown a crystal vase at a wall. The press got hold of the story within days. Maid claims billionaire heritage, screamed the headline in the Boston Globe. Cleaning Lady O. R. Cinderella? DNA test rocks Boston's elite, proclaimed the Herald. Reporters camped outside Rosa's apartment building. She had to take a leave of absence from all her jobs, partly because of the media circus, partly because none of her employers wanted the publicity of having the secret Worthington heiress scrubbing their floors. Rosa spent her days in her small apartment, watching her life become a public spectacle. There were op-eds debating whether she deserved the inheritance. Think pieces about class and privilege and immigration. Hot takes on social media calling her everything from a hero exposing the hypocrisies of the wealthy to a gold digger trying to scam her way into money. Through it all, Rosa said nothing publicly. Mr. Pemberton handled the press, issuing brief statements confirming the DNA test results and stating that Rosa was simply claiming what was legally hers. The Worthington family, meanwhile, launched a full-scale assault. Their lawyers claimed the DNA test was fraudulent. They claimed Rosa had somehow tampered with samples. They claimed the letter was a forgery. They hired investigators to dig into every aspect of Rosa's life, looking for anything they could use to discredit her. What they found was a woman who had lived a quiet, honest life. She paid her taxes. She'd never been in trouble with the law. She'd never even had a parking ticket. The investigators' reports painted a picture of someone who had worked hard, kept to herself, and asked for nothing from anyone. It made the Worthingtons' attacks look increasingly desperate and cruel. Public opinion, which had initially been divided, began to shift in Rosa's favor. Here was a woman who had scrubbed the toilets of her own half-siblings while they enjoyed luxury she could never dream of. A woman whose mother had died in poverty while millions of dollars sat in a bank account, untouched. A woman who had been denied her birthright because her father had been too weak to stand up to his family and his fiancée. The story had everything: secret love affairs, abandoned children, wealthy villains, a hard-working protagonist. The public ate it up. The confrontation. 3 months after the revelation, Rosa finally came face-to-face with her half-siblings. The meeting was arranged by the judge overseeing the estate case, who strongly suggested that the parties attempt to reach a settlement rather than engaging in a lengthy trial. It was held in a conference room at Mr. Pemberton's firm, neutral territory where everyone had to be on their best behavior. Rosa arrived early, dressed in a simple black dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, her first new dress in 5 years. She sat in the conference room, her hands folded on the table waiting. Richard Worthington arrived first, flanked by 2 lawyers. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and his father's blue eyes, Rosa's eyes. He looked at her with such venom that she actually flinched. "You have a lot of nerve," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Mr. Worthington, please," one of his lawyers interjected. "Let's wait for everyone to arrive before we begin discussions." Cameron and Victoria arrived together, both dressed in designer suits that cost more than Rosa had made in a year of cleaning houses. They stared at her with identical expressions of disgust, as if she were something unpleasant they'd found on the bottom of their shoes. Mrs. Eleanor Worthington was the last to arrive, her face pale and drawn. She'd aged since Rosa had last seen her, the revelation clearly taking its toll. But her spine was still straight, her chin held high. She didn't look at Rosa at all, instead taking her seat and fixing her gaze on some point in the middle distance. The lead lawyer for the Worthingtons, a shark in a three-piece suit named Jonathan Cross, opened the discussion. "Ems Martinez," he said, her name dripping with condescension. "My clients are prepared to offer you a settlement. $2 million, paid out over 10 years, in exchange for you dropping all claims to the Worthington estate and signing a non-disclosure agreement." Rosa didn't even need to look at Mr. Pemberton. "No," she said simply. "I'm sorry?" Cross said, as if he couldn't have heard correctly. "No," Rosa repeated, her voice stronger this time. "I'm not interested in your settlement." "Don't be ridiculous," Richard Worthington snapped. $2 million is more money than someone like you could ever hope to see. Take it and go back to wherever you came from. "Someone like me?" Rosa said quietly. "You mean your sister?" The word hung in the air like a bomb. "Sister. Half-sister, technically, but sister nonetheless." "You're not my sister," Richard said, his voice shaking with rage. "You're a con artist, a fraud, Mr. Worthington," the judge's mediator interjected. "Personal attacks will not be tolerated in these proceedings." "The DNA test proves otherwise," Mr. Pemberton said calmly. "Ems Martinez is Robert Worthington's biological daughter. That makes her Richard's half-sister and Cameron and Victoria's aunt. These are facts, not opinions." "My father would never," Victoria started. "Your father did," Rosa interrupted, her own anger finally rising to the surface. "Your father had an affair with my mother when he was in Guatemala. He got her pregnant. He set up a trust fund for me, but he was too much of a coward to actually acknowledge me. He let my mother and me live in poverty while he played the role of devoted family man back here in Boston." "How dare you?" Eleanor Worthington said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was ice. "How dare you speak about my husband that way? How dare I tell the truth?" Rosa shot back. "Your husband abandoned my mother. He abandoned me. He paid her to keep quiet, to stay out of his life. And all of you," she looked around the table at the Worthingtons, "you've benefited from that abandonment your entire lives. You've lived in mansions while I've lived in squalor. You've gone to the best schools while I dropped out to work. You've had everything while I've had nothing. And now you have the audacity to offer me a tiny fraction of what's legally mine and expect me to be grateful?" "You cleaned our house," Cameron said, his voice full of disgust. "You were our maid. And now you want us to believe your family? That you deserve an equal share of our inheritance?" "I don't want you to believe anything," Rosa said, her voice cold. "The DNA test speaks for itself. I don't need your acceptance or your approval. I just want what your father intended for me to have." "Our father," Richard said, emphasizing the possessive, "built Worthington Industries from the ground up. He dedicated his life to creating something for his family. His real family. Not some illegitimate child from a third world country." Mr. Pemberton's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Worthington, your father's will is very clear. Any biological children, legitimate or otherwise, are entitled to equal shares. The law doesn't care about your personal feelings on the matter." "Then we'll change the law," Richard said. "You can't," Mr. Pemberton replied calmly. "And every day you fight this, you're spending money on legal fees that could be going to something productive. The judge has already reviewed the case. The DNA evidence is incontrovertible. Ems Martinez is Robert Worthington's daughter. She has every legal right to her inheritance." Jonathan Cross leaned forward. "Ems Martinez, let me be blunt. If you pursue this, we will make your life hell. We will fight you in court for years. We will drag your name through the mud. We will investigate every aspect of your life. We will make you wish you had never found that letter." Rosa met his gaze steadily. "You can try, but I've lived through hell already. I've worked 3 jobs while my niece screamed in pain. I've skipped meals so I could pay rent. I've mourned my husband alone because I couldn't afford to take time off work to grieve properly. I've scrubbed toilets and cleaned up other people's messes for 20 years while watching people like you treat me like I'm invisible. So go ahead. Do your worst. I've survived worse than you can imagine." There was a long silence. Then Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "This is insane," she said. "Mother, tell them this is insane." But Eleanor Worthington said nothing. She was staring at Rosa now, really looking at her for perhaps the first time. Rosa saw the moment recognition dawn in the older woman's eyes. The moment she saw Robert Worthington in Rosa's features. The same blue eyes. The same stubborn set to the jaw. The same slight cleft in the chin. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered. "You look just like him. When he was young, you look exactly like him." The recognition seemed to break something in the room. The lawyers started arguing about discovery schedules and deposition dates. Richard Worthington shouted over them about the injustice of it all. Cameron pulled out his phone and started frantically texting, probably his accountant or financial advisor. But Rosa only watched Eleanor Worthington, who stared back with an expression that might have been horror or might have been grief. The waiting game. The legal proceedings dragged on for 8 months. Discovery. Depositions. Motions and counter-motions. The Worthingtons' lawyers tried every trick in the book to delay, to discredit, to derail. During this time, Rosa lived in a strange limbo. She couldn't go back to cleaning houses. The media attention made it impossible. But she also didn't have access to her inheritance yet. The trust fund money was frozen pending the outcome of the case. Mr. Pemberton arranged for her to receive a modest stipend from the trust, enough to pay her rent and expenses, but nothing extravagant. Rosa found herself with something she'd never had before: free time. She started reading again, something she hadn't done since childhood. She visited museums, taking advantage of free admission days. She walked through Boston Common and the Public Garden, watching the seasons change. She made friends with her neighbors, people she'd barely acknowledged during her years of working 3 jobs. She also started therapy, on Mr. Pemberton's recommendation. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, helped her process the whirlwind of emotions that came with her changed circumstances. "You're grieving," Dr. Chen said during one of their sessions. "You're grieving for your mother, for the father you never knew, for the life you could have had. That's normal and healthy." "I'm also angry," Rosa admitted. "So angry I don't know what to do with it." "That's normal too. You have every right to be angry. But what do I do with it? How do I move forward when I'm so full of rage at everything I was denied?" Dr. Chen smiled gently. "One day at a time. And remember, the best revenge is living well." Rosa also received an unexpected visitor one afternoon. She opened her apartment door to find a woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, with nervous eyes. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Jennifer Hartford. I worked for Worthington Industries, in accounting. I wondered if I could talk to you." Rosa invited her in, offering tea, which Jennifer accepted gratefully. They sat in Rosa's small living room, the space feeling even more cramped with a visitor. "I shouldn't be here," Jennifer said. "If the Worthingtons found out, I'd lose my job. But I needed to tell you something." "What is it?" "I've been going through old files as part of the discovery process, and I found records of the payments to your mother, Ms. Martinez. It wasn't just the trust fund. Robert Worthington sent your mother money every month for years. $10,000 a month, without fail, from the time you were born until she died." Rosa felt like she'd been punched. "What?" "Your mother never used it. She had the checks deposited into a separate account, but she never touched the money. It just sat there, accumulating interest. When she died, the payments stopped, and eventually the account was absorbed back into the Worthington corporate structure. It was all very quietly done." "How much?" Rosa whispered. "With interest? About $7 million. Rosa sat back, her mind reeling. $7 million. Her mother had access to $7 million and had lived in poverty, had died from treatable illnesses because she couldn't afford medical care, had watched her daughter struggle and sacrifice, and had never said a word about the money sitting in a bank account. "Why are you telling me this?" Rosa asked. Jennifer hesitated. "Because it's yours. That money was meant for you and your mother. And because I'm tired of working for people who treat others like they're disposable. The Worthingtons are fighting you with everything they have, spending millions on lawyers to avoid giving you what's rightfully yours. Meanwhile, they're planning to lay off 300 employees next quarter to boost profit margins. I wanted you to know the truth." After Jennifer left, Rosa sat alone in her apartment, thinking about her mother. Maria Elena had been so proud, so determined to make her own way. She'd seen the Worthington money as tainted, as blood money for her silence and absence from her daughter's life. She'd rather die than use it. Rosa understood the pride, but she also understood the waste. That money could have sent Rosa to college, could have given Maria Elena the medical care that might have saved her life, could have transformed their lives from a daily struggle for survival into something bearable, maybe even pleasant. Her mother's pride had cost them both dearly, and Rosa was determined not to make the same mistake. The trial. The trial began in February, almost a year after Rosa had found the letter in the Worthington study. It was held in probate court, theoretically closed to the public, but that didn't stop the media circus outside. Reporters shouted questions at Rosa every time she arrived or left. Cameras flashed constantly. Inside the courtroom, the drama was more subdued but no less intense. The Worthingtons' lawyers presented their case: that Robert Worthington had been deceived by a conniving woman looking for a payday, that there was no proof he'd actually intended for Rosa to inherit anything, that his true wishes were reflected in his original will, which left everything to his legitimate children. They called witnesses who testified to Robert's devotion to his wife and children. They presented evidence of his charitable works, his business acumen, his standing in the community. They painted a picture of a devoted family man who couldn't possibly have abandoned a child. Then Mr. Pemberton presented his case. He called the DNA expert who had conducted the test, who testified unequivocally that Rosa was Robert Worthington's biological daughter. He presented the letter from Maria Elena. He called Father Domingo, now in his 80s, who had flown in from Guatemala and testified that he had indeed helped Maria Elena write the letter, and that she had told him about the American who had fathered her child and then abandoned them both. He presented the bank records showing the monthly payments from Robert Worthington to Maria Elena Martinez. He showed the trust fund documents, clearly establishing Robert Worthington's intent to provide for Rosa. Most devastatingly, he presented Robert Worthington's own journals, which had been among his personal effects. The journals, which the Worthingtons had somehow failed to destroy or hide, contained numerous entries about his time in Guatemala, about the woman he had loved, about the impossible choice he had faced. One entry, dated shortly before his engagement to Eleanor, read, "I am a coward. I have chosen the easy path, the path of least resistance. I have chosen my family's approval and Eleanor's social standing over the woman I truly love. Maria Elena is pregnant with my child, and I am abandoning them both. I tell myself I'm doing the right thing, that I can better help them from afar, that I can send money and ensure they're cared for. But I know the truth. I'm running away. I'm choosing comfort and acceptance over love and responsibility. God forgive me. I will never forgive myself." The courtroom was silent as the journal entry was read aloud. Rosa saw Eleanor Worthington's face crumple, saw Richard's jaw clench, saw tears stream down Victoria's face. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, allowed a recess after that revelation. When they reconvened, the Worthingtons' lawyers looked defeated. They made a few more half-hearted arguments, but the writing was on the wall. After 3 weeks of testimony, Judge Morrison delivered her ruling. This court finds that Rosa Martinez is the biological daughter of Robert Ashford Worthington. The evidence is incontrovertible. Furthermore, this court finds that Robert Worthington intended for Ems Martinez to receive a share of his estate equal to that of his other children. His journals make his intentions clear, even if his actions in life were less so. She looked directly at Rosa. "Ems Martinez, you are entitled to 1/3 of Robert Worthington's estate, equal to the shares received by Richard Worthington and the combined trust of Cameron and Victoria Worthington. This includes 1/3 of his ownership stake in Worthington Industries, 1/3 of his real estate holdings, and 1/3 of his liquid assets. Additionally, you are entitled to the full amount of the trust fund established in your name, which currently stands at $12 million. Judge Morrison then turned her gaze to the Worthingtons. "I'm also ordering that the funds improperly reabsorbed by Worthington Industries from Maria Elena Martinez's account be returned to Ems Martinez with interest. That amount totals approximately $9 million. She paused, then continued. "I am deeply troubled by the actions of the Worthington family in this case. You fought the legitimate claims of a woman who had every legal right to her inheritance. You spent millions of dollars on legal fees trying to deny her what was rightfully hers. You attempted to smear her character in the press and intimidate her into accepting a settlement that was a fraction of what she was owed. Your father made a terrible choice 43 years ago. He abandoned a woman he loved and the child she carried. But he tried, in his own inadequate way, to make amends. He set aside money for his daughter. He kept records. He made his intentions clear in his private writings. The tragedy is not that Ems Martinez is claiming her inheritance. The tragedy is that she had to fight her own family to get it. The gavel came down, and just like that, Rosa Martinez was officially a Worthington and a very, very wealthy woman. The transformation. The weeks following the judgment were surreal. Suddenly, Rosa had access to more money than she could comprehend. The trust fund money was released immediately. The full inheritance would take longer to process, but Mr. Pemberton ensured she had access to enough funds to begin her new life. The first thing Rosa did was move out of her studio apartment. She found a modest two-bedroom condo in Cambridge, overlooking the Charles River. It wasn't a mansion. She wasn't ready for that kind of space, but it had heat that worked consistently, no water stains, and a view that didn't involve trash bins. She furnished it simply but comfortably, crying the first time she sat on her brand new sofa. She'd never owned a new sofa before. All her furniture had always been secondhand, salvaged from curbs or thrift stores. She paid off the medical debts that had been haunting her since Miguel's death. She established a scholarship fund at the community college in Guatemala where her mother had grown up, for young women seeking an education. She donated to shelters and food banks and organizations that helped immigrants navigate American life. But she also struggled. Money, it turned out, didn't automatically make life easier. It just changed the nature of the problems. She lost friends, or realized they'd never been real friends at all. Some people became obsequious, suddenly wanting to spend time with her, offering business opportunities and investment schemes. Others became resentful, making snide comments about how nice it must be to have things handed to you, conveniently forgetting the 42 years of hard labor that had preceded Rosa's inheritance. She was invited to charity galas and society events, where she felt like an exotic curiosity, the maid who became a millionaire. People wanted to hear her story, but they wanted the sanitized version, the feel-good narrative that confirmed their belief in the American dream. They didn't want to hear about the decades of struggle, the indignities, the casual cruelties of the wealthy toward those who served them. And then there was the Worthington family. They hadn't spoken to her since the trial. Richard had resigned from Worthington Industries rather than work with Rosa, who was now a major shareholder. Cameron had moved to New York. Victoria had stopped speaking to her mother, blaming Eleanor for not fighting harder against Rosa's claim. The family that Rosa had theoretically joined wanted nothing to do with her. Which was fine, Rosa told herself. She didn't need them. She'd never needed anyone. But that wasn't quite true, was it? Everyone needed someone. An unexpected ally. 6 months after the trial, Rosa received an invitation to lunch from an unexpected source. Eleanor Worthington. Rosa almost declined. What could she possibly have to say to the woman whose husband had been her father, whose life had been built on the same lie that had condemned Rosa to poverty? But curiosity won out. She agreed to meet at a quiet restaurant in Back Bay, somewhere neutral and public. Eleanor was already seated when Rosa arrived, looking older and more fragile than she had during the trial. The polish was still there, the perfect hair, the designer suit, the expensive jewelry, but something essential had dimmed. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said as Rosa sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not sure why I did," Rosa replied honestly. They ordered Eleanor a salad she barely touched, Rosa a pasta dish she was too nervous to eat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Rosa hadn't expected that. For what specifically? "There's a long list to choose from." Eleanor winced but didn't look away. "For all of it. For how my family treated you. For how I treated you when you worked in my house. I should have seen it, the resemblance to Robert. But I didn't want to see it. It was easier to just not look too closely, to accept the convenient lie that you were just the help." "Yes," Rosa said simply. "It was easier. I've done a lot of thinking since the trial," Eleanor continued. "About my marriage, about Robert, about the choices we all made. And I've come to realize that I was complicit in your suffering." "Complicit how?" "You didn't even know about me." "Didn't I?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "There were signs if I'd wanted to see them. Robert's guilt-driven generosity to Latin American charities. His insistence on anonymously funding scholarships for Guatemalan students. The way he would sometimes stare off into the distance with such sorrow in his eyes. I chose not to ask questions because I didn't want to know the answers. She paused, taking a sip of water with a trembling hand. And then you came to work for us. My God, Rosa. You look so much like Robert, and I never saw it. Or I saw it and convinced myself it was coincidence. Because acknowledging the truth would have meant admitting that my entire marriage was built on a lie. Was it? Rosa asked. A lie, I mean. Did he love you at all? I think he did, in his way. But he loved your mother more. I was the safe choice, the appropriate choice. Your mother was the love of his life. I read the journals too, you know. After the trial, I read every word. And it broke my heart because I finally understood that I was second best. I was always second best. There was real pain in Eleanor's voice, and Rosa found herself feeling an unexpected sympathy. Eleanor had been a victim of Robert Worthington's choices too, in her own way. Why are you telling me this? Rosa asked. Eleanor met her eyes. Because you're my stepdaughter. Technically. Legally. And because my children, Robert's children, have behaved abominably toward you, and someone in this family should acknowledge that. Richard's pride won't let him, and Cameron and Victoria are too young and spoiled to see beyond their own wants. But I can see it, and I'm ashamed. What do you want from me, Eleanor? Nothing, Eleanor said quietly. I want nothing from you except perhaps forgiveness. Not for Robert, he's beyond that now. But for myself, for looking at you for 5 years and never truly seeing you. For all the times I was dismissive or cold, or raising children who thought it was acceptable to treat service workers as less than human. Rosa sat back, studying the older woman. She could see the genuine remorse there, the weight of regret. I don't know if I can forgive, Rosa said slowly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I appreciate the apology. That's more than your children have given me. They're angry, Eleanor said. They feel like you stole something from them. I didn't steal anything. I claimed what was always mine. I know. But they don't see it that way. They see their inheritance cut by a third. They see a stranger with their father's eyes claiming to be family. They see their understanding of who their father was completely shattered. Eleanor paused. I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just explaining. I understand, Rosa said. But understanding doesn't obligate me to accept their cruelty. No, Eleanor agreed. It doesn't. They ate in silence for a while. Then Eleanor said, What will you do now? With your inheritance. Rosa had been thinking about that a lot lately. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by struggle and survival. That's a luxury very few people get, Eleanor observed. To reinvent yourself at 42. Is it a luxury or a curse? I knew who I was before. I was Rosa Martinez, cleaning lady, hard worker, survivor. Now I'm what? A wealthy woman who doesn't have to work. Someone with more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes but no purpose, no direction? Eleanor smiled slightly. Welcome to the existential crisis of the wealthy. It's why so many rich people throw themselves into charity work or start businesses or collect art. We need purpose just as much as anyone else. Money doesn't provide that. What's your purpose? Rosa asked. Eleanor considered the question. I'm still figuring that out myself. For years, my purpose was being Mrs. Robert Worthington, hosting the right parties, supporting the right causes, raising socially acceptable children. But that identity was based on a lie. So now I'm trying to figure out who Eleanor is when she's not playing a role. Rosa felt a strange kinship with this woman who had been her employer, her father's wife, her adversary. They were both, in their own ways, trying to rebuild their lives on foundations that had turned out to be sand. Maybe, Rosa said slowly, we could figure it out together. Not as family, necessarily, but as two people who've had their lives upended by the same man's choices. Eleanor's eyes brightened with something that might have been hope. I like that. New beginnings. Over the following months, an unlikely friendship developed between Rosa and Eleanor. They met for lunch regularly, usually at quiet restaurants where they wouldn't be bothered. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their marriages, their dreams and disappointments. Rosa learned that Eleanor had wanted to be an artist when she was young, but her family had considered it an unsuitable profession for a woman of her class. She'd married Robert partially out of love, but also out of a sense of duty to her family's expectations. Eleanor learned about Rosa's life before America, about growing up in Guatemala with barely enough to eat, about watching her mother work herself to exhaustion, about the dreams Rosa had harbored of becoming a teacher before poverty had made such dreams impossible. They were honest with each other in a way neither had been able to be with anyone else. Rosa didn't have to pretend she wasn't angry about her lost childhood, her mother's unnecessary death, the decades of struggle that could have been avoided. Eleanor didn't have to pretend her marriage had been perfect or that she wasn't devastated to learn her husband had loved someone else more. It was through Eleanor that Rosa began to understand how to navigate her new world of wealth and privilege. Eleanor introduced her to her financial advisor, a trustworthy woman who helped Rosa invest her money wisely and charitably. She taught Rosa about art and culture, taking her to galleries and concerts. She helped Rosa develop a sense of style that was her own, not the designer labels that Cameron and Victoria favored, but simple, elegant pieces that made Rosa feel comfortable and confident. And slowly, Rosa began to envision a purpose for her wealth beyond just having it. She established the Maria Elena Martinez Foundation, dedicated to helping immigrant women gain education and job skills. She funded English classes, vocational training programs, scholarships for community college. She partnered with organizations that helped women escape domestic violence, that provided childcare for working mothers, that offered legal assistance to immigrants navigating the complex American system. She also bought a building in Dorchester, not far from her old apartment. She renovated it into affordable housing for single mothers, with a daycare on the first floor and a community center offering classes and support services. She hired staff, including several women she'd worked alongside over the years, who now had stable jobs with benefits and dignity. The work gave her purpose. More than that, it gave her a way to honor her mother's memory and her own struggles. Every woman she helped was one fewer person who would have to choose between paying rent and buying food, between working 3 jobs and spending time with their children, between survival and living. The foundation also brought her into contact with other philanthropists, including some who had initially looked down on her as an interloper in their world. But as they saw the genuine impact of her work, as they witnessed her dedication and intelligence, their attitudes shifted. Rosa Martinez wasn't just a maid who got lucky. She was a force to be reckoned with, confronting the past. One day, almost 2 years after the trial, Rosa made a decision. She asked Mr. Pemberton to arrange a meeting with her half-siblings. Richard declined immediately, but Cameron and Victoria, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of some vague hope of reconciliation, agreed. They met at Rosa's foundation offices, her territory, her terms. Cameron arrived in a suit that probably cost more than Rosa used to make in a month. Victoria wore designer everything, her expression guarded. They sat in Rosa's office, an awkward silence filling the space. Rosa had rehearsed what she wanted to say, but now that the moment was here, the words felt inadequate. "Thank you for coming," she began. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Cameron said. "What do you want?" "I want to clear the air," Rosa replied. "We're siblings. Whether we like it or not, we share a father. We share DNA. We share a family legacy at Worthington Industries." "You took a third of our inheritance," Victoria said, her voice sharp with accusation. "I claimed what your father intended for me to have," Rosa corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Cameron leaned back in his chair. "Because from where we're sitting, you showed up out of nowhere and took money that was supposed to be ours." Rosa felt her temper flare, but kept her voice level. "That money was never just yours. It was always partially mine. Your father had an affair. He had a child. He set aside money for that child. The fact that you didn't know about it doesn't change the reality of it. He abandoned you," Victoria said, and there was something almost like sympathy in her voice. "He chose us over you. He spent our whole lives being our father while you grew up with nothing. Doesn't that tell you something about where you stood in his priorities?" The words stung because they were true. Rosa had thought about this often. The fact that Robert Worthington had 42 years to reach out to her, to be a father to her, and he'd chosen not to. He'd sent money, yes, but money was easy. Presence, acknowledgement, love, those would have required courage he apparently didn't have. "Yes," Rosa said quietly. "He chose you. And that hurt. It still hurts. But it doesn't mean I should be denied what's legally mine. Your father's choices don't obligate me to make myself smaller or to accept less to make you comfortable." Cameron studied her for a long moment. "What do you want from us, Rosa? Forgiveness? Acceptance? A happy family reunion where we all pretend the past didn't happen. I want you to see me as a person, Rosa said. Not as a threat, not as a thief, but as a person who has every right to be here, who has suffered just as much as you have from our father's choices. Probably more. How do you figure? Victoria asked. Because you got a father. An imperfect one, maybe, but a father nonetheless. You got advantages and opportunities and a life of comfort. I got nothing except the absence of all that. Your suffering is finding out your father wasn't perfect. My suffering was growing up without one at all. There was a long silence. Then Cameron said, Our mother says you've done good things with the money. The foundation, the housing project. I'm trying to, Rosa said. Why? Victoria asked. If I'd been poor my whole life and suddenly got rich, I'd be out buying everything I'd ever wanted. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, all of it. Rosa smiled slightly. I did some of that, but it felt hollow. Buying things doesn't fix the hole that poverty leaves in you. It doesn't heal the wounds of watching your mother die because she couldn't afford a doctor. It doesn't erase the memory of going to bed hungry or being cold because you couldn't afford heat. She paused, then continued. The foundation, the housing, that work fills something in me that buying things never could. It gives me purpose. And it helps people who are where I was, so maybe they don't have to suffer the way I did. Cameron and Victoria exchanged a glance. Some unspoken communication passed between them. We're not ready to be a family, Cameron said finally. I'm not sure we ever will be, but maybe. Maybe we can be civil. Maybe we can stop fighting. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rosa nodded. I can accept that. And Rosa? Victoria said as they were preparing to leave. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For how we treated you when you worked for us. You were invisible to us, and that was wrong. Yes, Rosa agreed. It was. Full circle. 3 years after finding the letter that had changed her life, Rosa stood in the Worthington estate. But this time, she wasn't there to clean. Eleanor had invited her to a small gathering, just a few people. Nothing like the elaborate parties the Worthingtons had been known for. Richard wasn't there. He'd moved to California and barely spoke to anyone in the family. But Cameron and Victoria had come, and they'd brought their children, Rosa's nieces and nephews who looked at her with frank curiosity. Your Aunt Rosa? One of them, a girl of about 8, asked. I am, Rosa confirmed. The one who used to clean this house. Yes. The girl considered this. That's weird. Why would you clean if you're family? Because I didn't know I was family then, Rosa explained. I thought I was just the cleaning lady. That's sad, the girl said matter-of-factly. Then she grabbed Rosa's hand. Come on, I want to show you my room. Rosa let herself be led up the stairs she'd vacuumed countless times, to a bedroom she'd cleaned so often she could navigate it with her eyes closed. But now she was seeing it as a guest, as family, and it felt entirely different. Over dinner, catered, not cooked by Rosa, the family made small talk. It was stilted and awkward, with long silences and careful avoidance of sensitive topics. But it was happening, and that was something. Eleanor had placed Rosa at the head of the table, opposite where Robert would have sat. It was a symbolic gesture, an acknowledgement of Rosa's place in the family hierarchy as a child of Robert Worthington. After dinner, Eleanor took Rosa on a tour of the house, pointing out things Rosa had dusted and polished 1,000 times, but never really looked at. This painting, Eleanor said, gesturing to a landscape in oil, was Robert's favorite. He bought it in Guatemala, actually, on the trip when he met your mother. Rosa looked at the painting with new eyes. It depicted a small village surrounded by mountains, children playing in a central square, women in traditional dress carrying baskets. It could have been her mother's village. He kept a piece of her with him, Rosa said softly. Yes, Eleanor agreed. In his way, he did. They ended up in Robert's study, the room where Rosa had found the letter. Eleanor unlocked a drawer in the desk and pulled out a worn leather journal. This was his last journal, she said. He wrote in it up until the week before he died. I want you to have it. Rosa took the journal with trembling hands. She opened it to a random page and read, I'm dying, though I haven't told anyone yet. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe a year. And all I can think about is Rosa, my daughter, who I never had the courage to meet, to acknowledge, to love openly. I tell myself I was protecting her, that revealing her existence would only bring her pain. But the truth is I was protecting myself. I was a coward when I was 25, and I remained a coward for the rest of my life. I set aside money for her. I made sure she would be provided for if she ever came forward. But money is a poor substitute for a father's love, for a father's presence. I gave Richard and Cameron and Victoria my time, my guidance, my pride in their accomplishments. I gave Rosa nothing but money and silence. If there's an afterlife, and if your mother is there, Rosa, I hope she has forgiven me. I hope you can forgive me too, though I have no right to ask for it. You deserve so much more than I gave you. You deserved a father. Rosa closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor handed her a tissue. He loved you, Eleanor said. In his inadequate, broken way, he loved you. It wasn't enough, and it wasn't fair, but it was real. Rosa wiped her eyes. I don't know if I can forgive him. I don't know if I should. Forgiveness isn't about should, Eleanor said gently. It's about can. And you don't have to decide right now. You have all the time in the world. They stood together in the study, two women bound by the choices of a man who was gone, trying to make sense of the legacy he'd left behind. Legacy. 5 years after finding the letter, Rosa Martinez, or Rosa Martinez Worthington, as she was sometimes called now, stood at a podium in front of 500 people. The occasion was the dedication of a new wing at Boston Medical Center, funded by the Maria Elena Martinez Foundation. The wing would provide free healthcare to uninsured immigrants, with a focus on women's health and maternal care. Rosa looked out at the crowd. Eleanor was in the front row, beaming with pride. Cameron and Victoria were there too, with their families. Even Richard had flown in from California, a peace offering of sorts after years of silence. Also in the crowd were dozens of women whose lives had been changed by the foundation, women who had been where Rosa had been, struggling and afraid and alone, who now had education, job skills, hope. My mother died when I was 12, Rosa began, her voice steady. She died of a treatable illness because we couldn't afford a doctor. She was 40 years old. She should have had decades left to live, but poverty killed her as surely as any disease. She paused, making eye contact with people throughout the room. I spent the next 30 years working 3 jobs, cleaning houses, scrubbing toilets, barely surviving. I thought that was my fate, to work until my body gave out, just like my mother's had. But I was wrong. I had a father, though I didn't know it. A father who had set aside money for me, who had tried in his inadequate way to make amends for abandoning my mother and me. When I finally discovered the truth, I had a choice. I could be bitter about the years of unnecessary struggle, or I could use what I'd been given to make sure other women didn't have to struggle the way I did. Rosa smiled. I chose both. I'm still working through the bitterness. Probably will be for the rest of my life. But I'm also working to create change. This medical wing is part of that. So is the foundation, the housing project, the job training programs, and all the work we'll do in the future. She looked directly at Eleanor. Someone once told me that the tragedy wasn't that I claimed my inheritance. The tragedy was that I had to fight for it. But I think there's another way to look at it. Yes, I had to fight. Yes, my father was a coward who should have acknowledged me from the beginning. Yes, my family made me prove my worth in court before accepting me. But through that fight, I found my purpose. I discovered that wealth isn't about how much you have. It's about what you do with it. And I learned that family isn't just about DNA. It's about the people who show up for you, who see you, who acknowledge your worth. Rosa's voice grew stronger. My mother's name was Maria Elena Martinez. She was a seamstress, a single mother, a woman who worked herself to death to provide for her children. She would never see the inside of a hospital wing like this. But because of her struggles and sacrifices, hundreds of other women will get the care she was denied. That's her legacy. And it's mine too. Not the money, not the Worthington name, but this, the work of transforming pain into purpose, of using privilege to lift others up, of making sure that poverty doesn't have to be a death sentence. The applause was thunderous. Rosa stepped back from the podium, feeling lighter than she had in years. She had fought for her inheritance, yes. But more importantly, she had fought to become someone worthy of it, not because of her DNA or her father's name, but because of her choices, her work, her commitment to making a difference. As the crowd moved toward the reception, Eleanor approached Rosa and pulled her into a hug. Your mother would be proud, Eleanor whispered. Rosa pulled back, smiling through tears. I think she would. Not of the money, She never wanted that. But of what I'm doing with it, of the woman I've become. I'm proud too, Eleanor said. You've taught me a lot about what really matters, about using privilege for good instead of just maintaining it. Cameron and Victoria approached, looking uncertain. But then Victoria said, "That was a good speech. Really good." "Thank you," Rosa said. "We'd like to help," Cameron added, "with the foundation. We'd like to contribute if you'd accept it." Rosa studied her half-siblings. They weren't perfect. They'd never be close in the way siblings who grew up together might be. But they were trying, and that counted for something. "I'd accept it," Rosa said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "You volunteer. Actually show up and work with the women we're helping. See them as people, not as charity cases or tax deductions." "Can you do that?" Cameron and Victoria exchanged a glance. Then Victoria nodded. "We can do that." Home. Rosa stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the simple black dress she'd chosen for the occasion. In a few hours, she'd be attending a gala in her honor, celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Maria Elena Martinez Foundation. She barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Not because she'd changed so much physically, though she had. Her hair was styled nicely now, professionally cut. She wore clothes that fit well and were made of quality materials. She stood straighter, carried herself with confidence. But the real change was in her eyes. The exhaustion was gone. The desperation. The fear that had been her constant companion for so many years. She was 47 years old. She was wealthy beyond measure. She was doing work that mattered. She had friends, family of sorts, a life that felt meaningful. And yet, there were still moments, like this one, standing alone in her bedroom, when she felt the weight of all those lost years. The education she never got. The career she never had. The children she and Miguel had never managed to have. The decades with her mother that poverty had stolen. The money had come too late to fix those things. It had come too late to save her mother, to give her back her youth, to undo the damage that poverty had inflicted on her body and spirit. But it hadn't come too late to matter. It hadn't come too late to help others. And perhaps that was enough. Rosa's phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Car's here. Ready to go." Rosa took one last look in the mirror. The maid who had discovered she was secretly rich. That's how the headlines had described her 5 years ago. But that wasn't who she was. She was Rosa Martinez Worthington. She was her mother's daughter and her father's child. She was a survivor who had become a philanthropist. She was a woman who had transformed pain into purpose. And she was, finally, home. She picked up her purse and headed downstairs to the waiting car, ready to celebrate how far she'd come and determined to keep working toward the change she wanted to see in the world. Because in the end, it wasn't the money that had saved her. It was what she'd chosen to do with it. And that choice, made new every day, was the real inheritance her mother had left her, the strength to endure, the courage to fight, and the wisdom to use whatever power she had to lift others up. That was Rosa Martinez's true legacy. And it was worth more than all the millions in the world. The end.